Started off with Rachel's opening statement. The timer is set for you, Rachel, for 15 minutes.
All right, so thanks for being here, everybody. We're talking about feminism today and if it's good for society. So most people believe that feminism became this dominant political force that it is today due to oppression and abuse by the patriarchy, that it was a grassroots idea whose time had come. Women looked around them and they were like, oh no, we're oppressed. We should march and stuff until we can vote and things will get better. It's not exactly how it went down. So surely if they achieved feminism, right, this would give them a better future, make them more safe, because most people believe that men are the primary threat to women's safety and security. Almost everyone in modern society believes that abusive marriages and oppression of women by the patriarchy was a fact of life, which made women miserable for all of history until about 100 years ago. But did you know that women didn't want liberation from the men in their lives? Most people don't know this. In fact, some of the most vehement opposition to women voting came from women themselves. These people were called anti-suffragettes, and they had much larger membership ranks than did the suffragettes themselves. It was far more popular. And these women who were in these anti-suffrage groups were not your average women who demanded feminism. I find their reasoning to be prescient and compelling, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what they believed right now. This is also why I think that this part of history has been obscured and most of you have never heard of it, because these women had some pretty good reasons, I think. So, in fact, when the option to add women's suffrage to the ballot was put forth in the referendums in multiple states, the measure was so unpopular with women that pro-suffrage groups actually moved to take that option off the ballot. That's right, a handful of feminists fighting for women's rights actually didn't want women to vote on whether or not they could vote. But don't believe me. Believe Susan B. Anthony, who said, "But the petitioners of suffrage are in the minority. There are many reasons for this, and one of them, paradoxical as it may seem, is because so much has already been gained. Woman in general now finds her needs very well supplied. If she wants to work, she has all occupations to choose from. If she desires an education, the schools and colleges are freely opened to her. If she wishes to address the public by pen or by voice, the people hear her gladly. The laws have been largely modified in her favor, and where they might press, they are seldom enforced. She may accumulate and control property. She may set up her own domestic establishment and come and go at will." Susan B. Anthony made this statement in her speech, The Status of Woman, Past, Present, and Future, which she delivered at the National Association for Women's Suffrage in Washington, D.C. in 1902. So in 1902, women already said, we kind of have everything we want. We kind of have it made. We don't really feel like we need this feminism stuff. In fact, we think that'll make things worse for us. So this, along with the rest of the historical record, kind of debunks this commonly held belief that women had no freedom to do anything prior to 1902. In 1914, the Nebraska Association Opposed to Women's Suffrage group published a pamphlet in response to a ballot initiative petition campaign proposed by the Nebraska Women's Suffrage Group. They accurately predicted that pushing women into the political sphere and the women's liberation movement in general would cause the breakdown of the family, division in marriages, and a lack of effort and focus on children and community, which had always been the main work of women up until this point. They also correctly pointed out that women enjoyed greater protection and privilege under patriarchy than was afforded to the liberated women. They believed, as I do, that women are much more influential and effective outside direct involvement in governing. They also wisely asserted that primary role of government is to protect people and property, and that men are the only ones capable of that task, see Force Doctrine. Therefore, burdening women with the task of which they are incapable is inappropriate and detrimental to women themselves. Why would we ask them to do something they're not capable of doing? These women predicted outcomes like the birth rate dropping from an average of 5 children per family in 1870, just prior to first wave feminism kicking off, to an average of just 2 children by 1940. That's a staggering drop. They were correct in predicting that feminism would inevitably result in the attempted demonization and domination of men. And anti-suffragists were right to ask, who will take care of the children? If we push women into the workforce, who raises the kids? Well, the overall number of U.S. children under 5 with mothers working outside the home in 1900 was less than 6%. By 2012, that number jumped to 58%. The anti-suffragists were also right about what the future of marriage and family would look like if we instituted these sweeping social changes. In 1900, the rate of births outside marriage was only 4%. By 2010, not quite a century after the passage of the 19th Amendment, that rate of out-of-wedlock births had reached 41%. But did feminism deliver on its promise to protect women and children from dangerous men? Let's look at the evidence. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has been tracking data on child abuse and neglect since 1978 with something called the National Incidence Study, or the NIS. The NIS is a congressionally mandated periodic effort of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. There have been 4 of these reports. The latest one came out in 2010. This includes a breakdown of data collected nationwide on child abuse and neglect by living situation. This section of the study opens as follows. Figure 5.9 shows the incident rates of endangerment standard maltreatment for the different family structure and living arrangement subgroups of children. The rate of overall endangerment standard maltreatment for children living with 2 married biological parents is about 16 per 1,000, and this is significantly lower than the rates for children in all other circumstances, which is 52 or more children per 1,000. Kids living with one parent whose unmarried partner was in the household had the highest incident of maltreatment. This is equivalent to more than 13 per 100 children, or more than 1 child in 8 whose single parent has a cohabitating partner in the general child population. Their risks of maltreatment is more than 8 times higher than that of children living with 2 married biological parents. And we're going to see this just repeated throughout the data, that children living with a single parent with an unmarried partner had the highest incidence of physical abuse by far, more than 10 times the lowest rate. So maybe this no-fault divorce stuff is not so great for kids, huh? Only 0.7 children per 1,000 children living with 2 married biological parents were sexually abused, compared to 12 per 1,000 children living with a single parent who had an unmarried partner. So that's more than 12 times. The lowest incidence of physical neglect occurred for children living with both married bio parents. The highest rate of physical neglect occurred for children living with a single parent and cohabitating partner, most commonly single mom plus boyfriend. This is over 7 times greater than kids living with both married bio parents. Same for physical abuse, same for emotional abuse, it just repeats. But perhaps the most relevant and more surprising finding was this. 68% of the maltreated children were maltreated by a female, whereas 48% were maltreated by a male. Some were maltreated by both. In contrast, male perpetrators were more common for children maltreated by non-biological parents or parents' partners. So once again, single mom plus boyfriend. The statistic is the most illustratory piece of data proving that removing children's biological fathers from the home is the single biggest risk factor for abuse. This supports my assertion that fathers, the family patriarchs, have the most interest and biggest protective effect on the lives of children. They're less likely to abuse than biological mothers, and once removed, make single mother homes an easy target for predators who are not related to the child. The second point I want you guys to understand today is that mothers are actually more likely to abuse or neglect children than fathers, by a pretty large margin. In 2021, about 211,000 children in the United States were abused by their mother, whereas 132 were abused by their father. This is consistent with these same findings we've been discussing all across the NIS data. Defenders of feminism object to these data by pointing out that mothers are more likely to be primary caregivers and spend the most time with the kids. But we can kind of test this hypothesis because there's a trend where men have gained far more custody and parenting time over the years, about 4.5 times more between 1968 and 2020. Given this, we would expect to see those abuse rates by fathers going up if they're spending 4.5 times more time with them. That's not what we see. It's just consistent over the last 45 years. That rate did not go up. A more likely explanation of why we see a larger share of mothers abusing children might be that women are much more prone to mental problems. In fact, we see increases in women struggling with mental health problems over recent decades, and women are about 3 times more likely than men to experience mental health problems. According to an analysis of prescription drug data, more than a quarter of American women, 26%, take a psychiatric prescription drug compared to just 15% of men. Here's some quick stats from the CDC about risks to children who grow up without their dads. Children from fatherless homes represent 90% of homeless kids, 85% of kids with behavioral disorders, 70% of kids in juvenile facilities, 71% of kids in adolescent substance abuse treatment centers. So across the board, the highest risk factor for bad outcomes for kids is broken homes and not having dad around. And one of the primary objectives of early feminism and also second wave was to get rid of no-fault divorce, get rid of marriage through the church, and make it just a state certificate that you can get out of easier than your cell phone contract. But what might surprise you even more than this is that men are not more likely to be perpetrators of domestic violence. Women are. Analyzing data gathered from 11,370 respondents, researchers found that half of violent relationships were reciprocally violent, meaning both people are committing the violence. In non-reciprocally violent relationships, the women were the perpetrators in more than 70% of cases. In one study, 1,100 lesbian or bisexual women in abusive lesbian relationships, researchers found that the women were more likely to have experienced violence in past relationships with women than with men. Feminism has promoted cohabitation rather than marriage for decades as a way to protect women from abusive marriages. Unfortunately, the data here is against them as well. A large study by Manning et al. Notes that cohabitation is associated with several factors that have the potential to reduce children's well-being. Cohabitation is a marker of family instability and is strongly associated with poorer outcomes for kids. Children born to cohabitating parents see their parents break up more often than children born to married parents. This is setting the stage for instability, and these kids are more likely to experience enduring deficits of psychosocial well-being. So finally, the expansion of the welfare state correlates directly to the rise in out-of-wedlock births. Welfare spending in 1950 was $50 billion. The non-marital birth rate then was 4%. By 2010, welfare spending increased 14 times to a whopping $700 billion, and this is adjusted for inflation. And the non-marital birth rate then rose to 41%. The same people who got the 19th shoved through also met in secret to write the Federal Reserve Act, as well as the federal income tax and compulsory education laws right around the same time. This effectively atomizes the family and means the government is your daddy now, America. This is great for transnational corporations, governments, predators, and the predator class. These same groups are masters at propaganda and public relations. According to Professor Joe C. Miller, who did a comprehensive analysis of college textbooks about the history of women's liberation, found that many of the important facts I noted here were intentionally removed from history textbooks over the course of decades as the field of women's studies was developed. And this was a liberal professor, guys. This wasn't some kind of right-winger. And he was shocked at this finding. But this is why almost everything people believe about the history of feminism is wrong. 100 years of propaganda throughout the culture and the institutions. If you want to know how we got here, there's your answer.
Thank you very much.
Hello. First off, I do want to say I'm a little angry at you coercing your husband into renting out an entire bar just to get me drunk before our debate. It's a little harsh. Conveniently, she didn't drink very much. Right, you ready to have this mansplained to you? Yeah, good. If I get
That was one of my jokes. You ruined it already.
if I get hungry, you can go to make me a sandwich, okay? Right. Morning, everyone. How you doing? I am here today to debate the lovely Rachel Wilson, who's written a book claiming feminism was basically invented by witches, CIA spies, and probably a couple of magic mushrooms along the way. If that sounds less like history and more like the rejected script for Stranger Things Season 5, then you're not wrong. Let's be clear, feminism is not an occult ritual, it's not a CIA psyop, it's definitely not a satanic plot to overthrow the nuclear family. It's the radical idea, well, radical back then, not really now, that women are human beings who should have the same rights as men, and that's it. It's not hard, it's not mystical, and it's not demonic. Before feminism, women couldn't vote, own property in many places, or even have their own bank accounts without a man's permission. In the 60s, women in the UK could be fired just for getting married. In the US, marital rape wasn't fully criminalized until the mid-90s, and that's not ancient history, that's pretty much yesterday. Rachel will claim things like women didn't even want the vote. Great claim, zero evidence. The moment women could vote, they turned out in huge numbers. The historical record is full of church women, union women, activist women, mothers, teachers, nurses, ordinary women organizing for suffrage. If your argument relies on pretending they didn't exist, then your argument is dead on arrival. Should also tell you feminism makes women less happy. Also, zero evidence. No serious study shows women were happier when they had no legal autonomy, no financial independence, and no escape from abusive marriages. Even if someone digs up one cherry-picked graph from a think tank that hates women working, happiness is complicated. You can't just point to modern stress and say, yes, must be the equality that did it. That's the way astrologists think. And then there's my favorite, the forced doctrine argument that Rachel and Jim Bob and Jake all love, that men are stronger. Ooh, look at my muscles. Therefore, we have given women rights out of benevolence. No, rights weren't given. They were won. Women organized, protested, lobbied, marched, starved themselves, chained themselves to railings, got arrested, got beaten, got force-fed, and refused to shut up. If feminism were just men being sweethearts, it wouldn't have taken 100 years of fighting to get a ballot paper. And here is the actual kicker. When societies give women equal rights, things improve. Education goes up, domestic violence actually goes down. Health outcomes improve, poverty shrinks, economies grow faster. Every major organization on earth, from the United Nations to the World Bank, backs that. The only people who don't are YouTube commentators who type with one hand while Googling how to talk to women. Rachel will tell you feminism is a conspiracy, that it's witches, demons, elites, CIA culture warfare, goddess worship, you name it, but here's the truth. Movements with millions of participants over 100 years don't start with a seance. They start with injustice. Feminism didn't appear because a demon whispered it into somebody's ear. It appeared because women were sick of being treated like unpaid labor with no rights and no escape. And look, credit where it's due. Rachel wrote a fantastic book, which is actually a great example of feminism working. A woman publishing, speaking publicly, influencing society, debating ideas on stage. That is feminism in action. She's literally doing the thing that says women, that she says women shouldn't be doing. Rachel, you are your own feminist success story. Feminism gives us female doctors, astronauts, scientists, prime ministers, Nobel Prize winners, and I mean real ones, like Marie Curie, Toni Morrison, I'll probably pronounce some of these names wrong, Mara Yousafzai, and Tu Youyou. It gave us leaders like Margaret Thatcher, Angela Merkel, Jacinda Ardern, and trailblazers like Katherine Johnson, whose maths put humanity on the moon. And let's be honest, it's also give us wives who roll their eyes at their husbands but still keep us alive. Behind every great man, there is a woman with her arms crossed, waiting for him to finally admit that she was right all along. So Rachel, you can talk about witches, conspiracies, pagan goddesses, shadowy elites, CIA plots, all you like. I will stick to history, evidence, and basic reality. Feminism isn't optional. Equality isn't optional, and women being amazing, capable, brilliant human beings is also not optional. If that bothers you, well, tough. Equality is happening with or without your permission.
So, Craig, with whose permission is this equality happening? Humanities. Okay, so when you said that women were granted rights by society, you mean men?
At the time, men were the one that were in charge of society, but that's what women fought for. Women starved themselves, chained themselves to railings, allowed themselves to be beaten just so that they could have the rights that men have. Yes, of course, because men were the ones that ran society. We had to agree, okay, maybe we should give women rights. And that is a fact that nobody can deny. Men were in charge, mostly have been, not every society in history, but the majority of them. And we had to allow women to have the rights. But they fought for that, and they deserve what they fought for.
Well, first of all, it was just a very small handful of crazy terrorist women who did, like you said, they starved themselves, but they also bombed federal buildings and bombed storefronts and terrorized people, and this was a tiny minority. You said that it's not true that most women didn't want the vote and that they came out in huge numbers as soon as they got it. That's actually not true. In both the UK and the United States, only a tiny minority of women actually went to the polls until the 1960s. So they had the vote for like 40 years before most of them used it. And as I stated in my opening, in the referendums on whether women wanted the vote, only like in Massachusetts, they had a statewide referendum on this in the early 1900s. Only about 4% of women who even bothered to show up said they wanted the vote. That doesn't sound like a majority to me. That doesn't sound like a grassroots movement of women who just demanded these changes. That sounds to me like an astroturfed top-down thing. But that aside, again, if men granted women the rights, doesn't sound like they were this evil patriarchy just hoping to keep their boot on women's necks and hold them down. It could be that there were good reasons for things being the way they were for all of human history up until 100 years ago. So what you're going to find is that all of these arguments against feminism rely on framing. They rely on the fallacy of presentism, which is where we look back at history with our present eyes and our present ideals and judge it, which is not accurate. It's actually a logical fallacy to do that. So when Craig says things like, oh, women couldn't have, their own bank accounts or their own credit cards, do you guys think there could be a practical reason for this, or was it just men are mean and they don't want women to have money? In fact, there was a practical reason. And when he talks about laws being unequal during this time, he's right, because men were held to the standard of maintaining their families and supporting them. These laws were called breadwinner laws, which were, men could go to jail if they deserted their families or didn't support them, and only men could be held liable for debt. So the way it worked was, maybe you couldn't have a credit card in your own name as a woman because you usually weren't employed. You had someone taking care of you and paying your bills. So you could get on your husband's account at the department store or the grocery store and spend his money. You could run up the debt, but they couldn't hold you legally liable for it. He had to pay the bill. Sounds like a pretty good deal. I'd take that. So, and the same thing with women losing their jobs. This was a common thing. These were marriage bar laws. So if you were a teacher, it most often applied to teachers, they would have in your contract that once you got married, your job would be terminated. But once again, there was a good reason for this. They said, well, you're married, so your husband can support you, you're taken care of. We want these teaching jobs held open for young women who are not married yet, for widows, for older women who've never married. We'd like them to have the teaching jobs. So again, it's framing to make it sound like women were victims of something when really it was the patriarchy taking care of them, and things were logically done this way for the good of everyone.
Okay.
Switch it into about 90-second responses. Go ahead, Craig.
So your claim that women didn't want the vote, the numbers disagree with you. In the United States, 2 million plus women were members of the National American Women's Suffrage by 1917. On the other side, the anti-suffrage women's group had around 350,000 members at the same time. And even historians say that number is probably inflated. That's like 5 to 1. 1913, Washington, D.C. suffrage parade had 8,000 women. You don't just get marches in the streets without there being actual people there. In the United Kingdom, the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies had over 50,000 women members by 1914. The WSPU, the suffragettes, had thousands more. Many were jailed, beaten, and force-fed. In the 1907 Mud March, had over 3,000 women publicly marching in the rain. That was massive for the time. Meanwhile, the largest anti-suffrage women's group peaked at around 20,000 and then collapsed and merged with some men's organizations. So the reality is that women did want the vote in enormous numbers in organized structures over decades in every country where suffrage was won. Your claims require pretending that the marches didn't happen, the arrests didn't happen, the hunger strikes didn't happen, the petitions didn't happen, the letters weren't written, the organizations weren't real, the documents in the archives aren't there. That's just kind of erasing history, nothing else. The idea that women never wanted the vote collapses the moment you open an actual history book. In the US, over 2 million women proved that fact.
So again, we're relying on framing here. So you might notice he said, oh, by 1917, there was more membership in some of the pro-suffrage organizations than the antis. Yeah, because and this was not the case for decades running up to this. It was flip-flopped. And what happened is Cornelius Vanderbilt, Alva Vanderbilt Belmont, and some other rich benefactors paid to plump these numbers up. They paid money and funded this whole thing and created giant propaganda campaigns. They created newspapers, pamphlets, and kind of pushed everything that way. So no, it wasn't that women all got together and did this. It was a handful of people who pushed the propaganda, much like we see now when there's marches and people are being bussed in by NGOs and being paid by George Soros to show up and protest. This is true with almost every social revolution, by the way. It's almost never grassroots. If you go back and look, there's usually CIA or intelligence asset involvement, very rich billionaires who are funding these things, and they'll just monopolize the propaganda and push it and push it and push it for decades until they get seemingly enough people on board. So again, this is just a logical fallacy to say this was a groundswell of grassroots movement.
Rachel, quick question. You cite women's anti-suffrage groups, but if women never wanted the vote, why did they need an anti-suffrage movement?
Because they were opposed to suffrage for multiple reasons. They thought it was going to corrupt the family, pit man and woman against each other. They didn't want to have to be involved in the draft. They didn't want to have to do jury duty. They said, we can't secure the government. This is what I said in my opening. We can't protect the borders. We can't go off and fight wars. We can't protect persons and property. They said this is the point of government. If the point of government is to protect persons and property, and we're not capable of doing that, why would you task us with such a thing? So maybe you can answer that.
Well, the follow-up question is, why were the anti-suffrage groups always of lower numbers and
they
decline?
weren't. That's not true. In the United States, they had much higher membership numbers up until about 2 to 3 years before they passed the 19th.
The data really doesn't show that. The historical records entirely disagree with that statement.
It's not true. I have multiple citations in my book and in articles that I've written. So
your book is wonderful. I've read it several times. And the first red flag for me was that it's a 170-something page book with only 30 citations. No credible academic source would have less than 30 citations in a paragraph. So, and your citations, when you actually dig into them, every single one of the citations that you used in your book were diametrically opposed to the points that you were making. You are extremely good at cherry-picking data, almost like a flat earther.
That's actually not true either. Again, we're relying on framing. So if you go read my book and you look at the source material, I take the writings of feminists themselves, like I just did with Susan B. Anthony. I quote the very women who were at the front lines of this, the ones who were usually bought and paid for and propped up to be the face of this movement, by the way. And they tell you themselves, Susan B. Anthony said, women don't want this. They have it too good. They have everything they want. They can go to college. So he said a lot of stuff in his opening that was also incorrect. Women were never legally barred from education. We had women's universities already in the 1800, in 1870. We had many of these institutions. It's true that there were a few Ivy League schools that didn't let women in, but so what? This is not some systemic oppression, right?
I do agree with those points that
yeah, and they were allowed to work, and they were allowed to have property, and just because, here's the thing, every time we look at women having any limit put on them, we pretend as though that was not true for men as well, and it was. So he said women didn't have the vote. That's true. Did you know that men only got the right to vote about 10 years before women did? All men couldn't always vote. And people just assume this because it's always framed and presented this way, as though all men had all the rights and no women had any rights, and it's simply just historically inaccurate. Women had all kinds of rights. Men took very good care of them, and this is one of the reasons they did cite wanting to be anti-suffragists, because they said, look, we have protection and provision right now that we're going to lose if you try to make us equal with men. We don't want to go out and work 40-hour weeks and raise kids and be in government and politics and have to vote in opposition to our own husbands. We don't like this idea. We think it's going to break up families, and that's what we care about.
Well, I disagree that it breaks up families. I've got actually quite a lot of data on the when you were talking about child neglect and things like that, and yes, it's the rise of feminism is also the rise of that, but it's also the rise of Pokemon. There's been a rise of child neglect. You're doing a correlation, not causation thing there, and I'd love to actually go through the data with you at another point. I really want to talk to you about your book because I did enjoy it a lot, honestly. But you just can't erase the fact that millions of women fought and marched and protested. Saying that women didn't want the vote is ignoring the fact that women were marching in the street saying, we want the vote.
Some women, a minority of women. So what?
Wasn't a minority.
It was a minority.
There was also a lot of women that wouldn't voice it that they wanted it because they were in the position of, well, my man maybe doesn't want me to vote, so I'm going to say that.
That's not what Susan B. Anthony said. She said that if women, by the way, this is the other great criticism everybody has of me, is that I'm a feminist because I wrote a book, or I'm a feminist because I'm here speaking to you. Again, 1902, Susan B. Anthony said, women are allowed to speak in public, women can write books. If we go back to the late 1700s, there were feminists writing polemics, touring, being single moms, right? Mary Wollstonecraft was a single mother who was paid to tour Europe and talk about feminism. She was paid to write. She made a living for herself off of writing about feminism in the late 1700s. So this idea that women couldn't do these things, it's a logical contradiction because they had to do those things to even get feminism going.
Sorry, I was getting a bit of feedback out of those.
But if you hold your mic up closer, you won't have to boost your audio.
So not all women were voicing their opinions. The advent of feminism, a lot of women just weren't speaking up because they were very used to really not speaking up. Now, I'm going to agree with you that, women could teach and stuff before, but it was frowned upon in society in a lot of times. I'm not going to go listen to a woman talk. Who wants to listen to a woman talk? Whereas now, Rachel, you can stand on stage with an entire room of people that absolutely love listening to you. You are influencing these people in a way that feminism has attributed you the right to do.
That's not true. I just got done debunking that idea.
Let me finish my point. It's not just what the data shows, it's what the people's attitudes were. The men were the ones that were deciding what was happening. The men were saying to the women, "Oh, maybe you shouldn't have the vote." And the
men are still the ones deciding what's happening. I wouldn't be able to do this right now without men. This microphone I'm holding was invented by a man. A man plugged this in. James is running this whole
debate. And the woman can do that,
This
right?
Electricity, this technology, this building that we're sitting in is built by men and it's maintained by
so
men. And women cannot do that.
The advancement of hold on. Who wrote the software that sent men to the moon?
Oh, women of color?
No. Who cares about the color?
They got it right the first time, by the way, by hand.
Who cares about the color? The woman wrote the software for a man to go to the moon, and they chose a woman to do that because she was the best one to do it at the time. In fact, before we had computers like we call computers were usually women that were doing lots of math really, really quickly. That was what a computer was.
So do you think those women can build and maintain the infrastructure that allows us to have technology?
Absolutely they can. There's no reason why a woman could not use the tools that a man uses.
That's really weird because I've noticed this bizarre thing that feminism magically came about after the technological and industrial revolutions. Isn't it weird that we had thousands of years of history that women never dominated, feminism never came about? It's almost like we needed the Industrial Revolution and the technological revolution to produce technology that gave us this illusion that women are equal with men and that they can do everything a man can do. Over 90% of infrastructure jobs are still held by men. And it's not because women haven't been pushed to do it. It's not because they because they just want to do it and the evil misogynists are keeping them out. Number one, they can't. Physically, they cannot run oil rigs. They cannot pour concrete all day. They cannot do roofing. They cannot. Physically, they can't do those things for more, if they can do them at all.
The largest building group where I live in Fife is run by women, and the majority of their employees are women. And one of the most successful...
what is it? Say the
I live in a place called Fife in Scotland.
Okay.
And the largest building group is... A lot of their employees are women, and their CEO is a woman.
Okay, who's putting up the steel beams? Who's laying the concrete?
The women that are doing the work, using the tools.
Oh, are?
There's no reason that a woman can't put some concrete into a thing, put it on to melt, and then pour it out. Tools allow you to do things. I was in the military, and I trained with lots of women that would go on the marches alongside me, and just be just as able to have endurance.
That's weird because why don't we have any female Green Berets or Navy SEALs? After decades of them desperately trying to produce one, and they've still never been able to do it. Why do you think that is?
Because men are stronger, and the standards to get in are based on you doing this, and men are naturally. I'm never going to deny the fact you are 100% right. Men are bigger and stronger.
Yes.
But we live in a world where now, maybe before, obviously to get things started, maybe we needed bigger men to make the machines in the first place. But now we live in a world where the machines already exist to make other machines.
So you agree with
make
me?
Tools.
He agrees
Hold
with
on
me.
one second, please.
He just conceded that it was men who created technological advancements that even made it
Rachel,
possible to imagine that women could be
Rachel,
on par
that is
with
the point.
men.
That is the beginning. That is where it started. But we live in a world now where it doesn't need to be just the men. A woman can do the job just as well as a man if the tools are available.
So it's just tools.
Well, the tools exist now.
So
and women can also make tools.
Have you ever seen the viral videos of men running oil rigs and going down into sewers and dealing with that sort of thing?
Are you saying there's 0 women that work on oil rigs?
There are almost 0 women in the
almost
hard
0,
labor.
Or are there 0?
It doesn't matter if there's an outlier.
Of course it matters, because if you're saying that women can't do this job, that would mean that there has to be no women doing this job. If there is women doing this job, then that means women are capable of doing this job.
He's literally doing the meme where you say most women are shorter than men, and some woman goes, "But I'm 5'7" though, and I know a man that's 5'4". It's
literally not what I'm saying. Your claim was that women can't work on oil rigs. That was the word you said. I'm not misquoting you. You said women.
Women.
Then Rachel, why are there women that work on oil rigs? Why is there?
There aren't women that do the actual hard labor.
Are you claiming there is 0?
Like
Rachel,
pulling the 300, 400-pound things. Have you ever seen a woman lift a 400-pound diesel engine and drop it into a truck?
Are you claiming there is no women in the world that do that job?
I'm claiming that women as a group cannot maintain.
No, Rachel, come on, stop avoiding the question.
Claim. Don't straw man my claim.
Is there any women in the world that do the job?
I'll grant it doesn't matter, because what I'm saying is...
she won't admit it. She won't admit that women are able to do the job.
She's saying women are incapable of doing. Maybe some women are. It has no bearing. Because here's the question, Craig. Here's the question. Can women as a whole keep the infrastructure that maintains this modern world going without men?
Yeah.
No, they can't.
Why not?
Well, you love science, right?
Yes.
So... scientifically, let's think about this. If tomorrow all women disappeared from planet Earth and only men were left, how do you think people would do? Do you think that they could keep electricity going? They could keep food supply lines
Honestly, most men are pretty stupid, and we'd be dead in a few weeks without the women.
Wow.
Come on. Every husband here knows for a fact that their wife has kept them alive, and you can't argue with me.
I didn't know I was debating like the final boss of Simps today, but here we are. So
I'm not going to deny that I adore women. I see the value.
I can tell.
I see the value and the power that women can have, but I in no way think women are above men.
So
and that's one thing I just want to...
Hold on, give me
one sec. Give me one sec.
Sure.
That's what I want to make clear. I am never going to claim that we should bow down to women and, women should be in charge. I just think that women should be afforded, if they want to do these things, the opportunity and the ability and the rights to do it.
Well, they've had that for 100 years, and they don't want to do it. Guess what? The women here don't want to do sewage treatment work.
Maybe these women don't, but there's some that do.
They don't want to pour concrete. They don't want to do cell phone tower maintenance where you're climbing,
Rachel, then why is there people that do that are women?
There aren't.
None at all.
It's a tiny...
once again, she's claiming that
it doesn't matter. It doesn't, as we've said...
It doesn't matter. This is not
It doesn't matter. Pointing to an outlier does not mean that women as a group could maintain modern technical infrastructure.
Rachel,
I can't believe that a guy who believes in science is sitting here trying to get you all to believe that if men disappeared from the planet tomorrow, which is part 2 of my question, let me get it out. Part 2 of the question. All men disappear from planet Earth tomorrow, and it's only women. How long do you think people survive? How long do the lights stay on? How long do we have clean drinking water? How long do we have indoor plumbing? How long before buildings start collapsing, before elevators don't work? Because men are the ones that build and maintain these structures. Women, as a group, cannot and don't want to, but they cannot do it. It's not possible for women to do.
The world we live in now, with the tools that exist in the world that we live in now...
Who builds
hold
the
on,
tools?
Let me finish, Rachel, please. The tools already exist. And your question is, if they disappeared now, and right now, the tools exist. So if all the men disappeared right now, the women would pick up the tools the men were using and keep things going.
That is hilarious. I love that. So you think, and by the way, I am a firearms instructor. I've trained women using firearms for years. And
pew pew.
Yeah. More than half of my female students do not have the hand strength to properly load a magazine and operate a semi-automatic pistol. I have to give them a revolver, something that's smaller, something their hand strength can handle. It usually takes me a good
That's
several...
a badly designed gun.
Huh?
It should be easy to load a gun. You shouldn't take that force.
Oh, it's spring-loaded. Maybe you're not familiar. You were in the military.
So
these
I use an
spring-loaded
SA-80,
magazines,
and with the
yeah,
SA-80,
they take a
with
little bit of hand
SA-80,
strength.
one pullback, and anyone could do that.
The average
no
male
problem.
has like double the hand strength that a woman has.
And the guns exist that are easy to load.
Sure, and look, there's a reason why I tell women to train with them, because they're the only thing that comes close to kind of equalizing force. It's really the only thing we've got.
Hold on.
But it's not enough.
Let me ask you a question.
To maintain, we're talking about maintaining the modern world, and I'd love for you to tell me how tomorrow, just because the tools exist, women are going to start building steel buildings. They're going to start laying concrete. They're going to start doing infrastructure jobs where you have to be able to lift hundreds of pounds.
Why would they not? Do you not know that exoskeletons are a thing? Right, you are posing it. You are positing it in a very specific way. If they disappeared now, we live in a world now where women can use tools to make them a lot stronger than they ever were.
I just want to jump in. Folks, if you're in the audience, I need you to, if you're going to say something to a friend, I need you to whisper it as quietly as possible, because I can hear from both sides. Some folks that are talking to a friend, and I can hear it as if it's at a normal volume. I need you to whisper it, or ideally don't do it at all, just so we can hear the speakers. Go ahead.
Sorry, what was I saying?
You were telling me how the strong, independent women are going to start laying concrete and doing roofing tomorrow because tools.
Well, do you agree that the tools exist that allow people to do these jobs?
The tools exist that allow men to do those jobs.
Why
Could
women not use those tools?
You don't put a jackhammer in Rachel's hand and she can suddenly operate it. I weigh
So is there any women
pounds?
that can use jackhammers?
There might be some woman somewhere. Do you think that there are enough
I know women specifically that use jackhammers.
So if let's here's a good analogy to try to help you understand this. I don't know what's not computing. Let's imagine that we're trying to maintain populations and only 1% of women can give birth. Do you think we're going to maintain the population, or do you think we need far more than 1% of women to be able to do that in order to maintain it on a systemic level? It's the same thing with infrastructure. Just because you have one or two butch-ass chicks who can maybe do some of these things for a limited amount of time, you would never keep thousands of cities running. You would never keep nuclear power plants and oil rigs and sewage treatment plants going if only women had to run them. You need men for modern civilization. So again, this is all an illusion. The illusion women have that they're equal with men is built on the premise that this stuff just appeared here. These lights just appeared. This microphone I have the tool. The tool is here. We see this in certain places where we go to give tribal people modern tools. We give them water. We give them wells. And then when the people who give it to them leave, they cannot maintain it. They don't have the IQ, or they don't have the prerequisite skills to maintain what you've given them. It would be the same thing. And even if you have tools, they still require strength. Like I said, diesel engines. There's jobs that require multiple big, strong dudes with big, huge tools to build giant skyscrapers, to put sewer pipes into the ground. Like these big infrastructure jobs, it's just a fact of physics, and you're supposed to be a science and evidence guy.
Yeah, but
I don't
Rachel,
get
you're
this.
just saying that women can't do that.
They can't.
But there is
As a
women.
group,
There is women that do that. But there's
what
also,
would it matter if there's
also,
three women?
Wait,
Do you think
Rachel, can I just let you
Sally
talk
is
for
going to
ages?
just maintain the world on her own? Sally and Karen, the two that can theoretically do this?
Let's switch it over to Craig.
Thank you. So there's weak men as well as weak women. But there is more than enough women in the world that are capable of holding a jackhammer and moving trucks and loading things and using tools and conveyor belts and everything. There is more than enough women in the world that are smart enough and capable enough to use the tools that already exist to keep it going. You are just saying, I don't think women are strong enough to ever do this. You've got no data to back up that women can't do this. The fact that women do these jobs, even if it is an outlier.
Ryan or folks, if you can turn your phones off and keep the talking the audience down.
Yeah. The fact that women do these jobs that you are saying women can't do just disproves you. Yes, there's less of them. Maybe a lot of them don't want to do it, but some do. And that's what feminism is. Feminism is saying that you have to do this job. Feminism is saying that if you want to and you're able to, go on then.
Craig, the best argument you're making today is that I, as a woman, am better at understanding logic and physics than you, a scientist man. Like, that's your best argument, and the one that makes me feel like maybe you got me is the fact that I'm here with my blonde hair, looking like a bimbo, and understanding these very simple concepts better than a man who, debates scientifically for a living. You're actually sitting here trying to argue against physics and biology. You think men and women are equal and can do the same things? You think they have the same levels of strength, they have the same capacity? Or is it that, just one sec, because even if a couple women are stronger than men and a couple men are weaker than women, on average, that does not negate the whole, which is that on average, almost all men are stronger than almost all women. Just because you can point to an outlier doesn't prove your case. And as a guy who debates flat earthers, you should know this. And I know that you know it. So I don't even think you're being serious.
Your claim that there aren't enough women to do these jobs there's no data to back that up. So maybe right now, not a lot of women.
There is data to back it up.
Maybe right now, not a lot of women do those jobs. But if those jobs were needed because there is no men left, women would do it, and they would use the tools, and they would go, right, so I'm strong, maybe I should go and do that because that would be good for society right now because we need to keep the oil plants running.
Okay, here's a question. Let's say we do that. Let's say all the women take over all the infrastructure jobs. It's kind of like evolution, I guess, where you have enough time. If you have enough time, just excessive amounts of time, and somehow women are going to become men. It just changes into something else because time. Maybe it's like that. But let's say this happens. What? Let's say that women become strong enough to maintain the infrastructure that allows them to get strong enough to maintain the infrastructure. What happens to the birth rate?
If there's only women.
If women are maintaining the infrastructure. We just say, look, men, you've done enough. Just sit down and rest, kick up your feet. We've got this. We're going to take it from here.
But that's not what feminism is.
We do the Rosie the Riveter. We're like, we've got this. We're going to take care of the infrastructure. We've got this. Don't worry about it. Just sit back. You can take care of the kids. So we already see now that birth rates are falling below replacement levels. And the number one correlate worldwide, regardless of economics, regardless of race, country, anything, is women's access to higher education and their participation in the workforce. In other words, when you tell women, go work all day long, they don't want to have a bunch of kids. So if the women are maintaining the infrastructure, who births the babies? Who's going to raise them and breastfeed them and get pregnant and do all the labor and delivery?
So, right, yes, there is a fall in birth rates, pretty much around the world at the moment. But the interesting thing is that the fall in birth rates also applies to countries that are extremely men, or countries that have nothing to do with feminism. A lot of those countries, the birth rates are also falling. So to claim that the fact that birth rates are falling is due to feminism ignores the fact that birth rate is also falling in countries where feminism is non-existent.
Well, I have a study here in my phone I can pull up.
I have several as well.
I have a bunch. They did a huge study.
I've got more than you.
They had a huge study in China. China's this big emerging global superpower, and they did a big study there. And they found there that the number one correlate to lower birth rates is women's access to education and work. This makes total sense. There were things that contributed to falling birth rates before that, like the birth control pill and other contraceptive methods, and then widespread acceptance and legalization of abortion. But that doesn't even account for the further drop we've seen in the decades since that. And what it is NGOs going in around the world to places like Africa, to places like Asia, and pushing women's liberation there, pushing women to school. So this is another thing that we've done. We've subsidized women's education, and we've pushed them into going to college around the world and told them, you can't have a good life without college. Children are a ball and chain. They're going to hold you back. They're going to be bad for you and make you vulnerable to abuse. So you need a college education, and you have to go to work instead. And when we do that, what we see is women don't have babies. Why? It's super intuitive. If you're spending your fertile years going to college and building a career, you're not going to have kids. If you do have kids, you're going to wait until you're in your 30s or later. So the average age a woman has her first child now in this country is close to 30. It used to be 20. And we're seeing maternal mortality rates go up in the modern world for the first time since we discovered germ theory and antibiotics, because women are waiting until they're in their late 30s or 40s to have babies, at which point it becomes more dangerous. The risk to the mother and to the child and birth defects all go up. So this is ass-backwards, stupid stuff to do if you want to maintain a civilization. You don't tell women to spend their fertile years pursuing higher education, which, by the way, I think like 80% of the field of psychology degrees are held by women. So all they do is the same stuff they've always done. If you look at the jobs in 1920 that women held and the jobs that women hold now, the top 20 jobs are almost exactly the same. We do early childhood care, we do nursing, we're retail workers, we're secretaries, and then there's like psychology and interior design and a lot of other fluffy stuff. And the only thing that changed was we swapped farm labor for HR work. So I don't know about you, but I think that we would rather have mothers producing babies so that human beings can continue to exist rather than just more HR ladies and psychologists.
Well,